Hello, my crafty friends. Well, today we are going to do some paper tearing. We are going to play around with a fun technique called the fault line technique. And I have 3 different ways you can use this technique in your card making. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have 3 different card ideas I want to share with you that feature the fault line technique. Now, this technique is very simple to do. It just involves a little bit of paper tearing and a little bit of layering. Now, the cards in this video feature the Textured Notes stamp set from Stampin Up. And I am also featuring some of the designer paper, which is called Woven Textures. It's part of an entire suite of products. However, keep in mind you can use any stamp set or supplies you have on hand with this particular technique. All right, so the first way that you can use this technique in your card making is simply to use some colored cardstock and then use some designer paper. So we are actually going to tear the cardstock and the designer paper. So you're going to start with a 4 1/4 by 8 1/2 inch piece of cardstock. So I'm just using pecan pie cardstock because it coordinates with the designer paper that I'm using. You can use any color that you want. So you basically want to create an A2 size card. So when we fold on the 5 1/2 inch score line, it just creates a 5 1/2 by 4 1/4 inch piece of cardstock. So once you've created your card base, the next thing you want to do is cut a 4 1/4 by 2 3/4 inch piece of pattern paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this up and we're going to tear these 2 pieces together. So I'm just going to line this up on this little cardstock edge here, and we're just going to tear diagonally. So you're going to want to do this slowly, and you want to create a nice tear line, and you'll have to inch your fingers along as we go because both pieces of paper will want to kind of move on you. So just kind of inch your fingers down and do the tearing. And just tear from this upper corner down to this lower part. All right, so you'll create 2 torn pieces. All right, so we have this torn piece for the top here. This goes with this piece. And then we have these 2 torn pieces from the bottom. So notice how this is how we did the paper tearing. So notice how we get a nice white edge here and we don't get a nice white edge here. We are going to use it this direction. I'm going to show you a little tip for how to make that edge white. But if you flip this over, you'd actually end up with 2 different patterns, which isn't the worst either. So if you like that look, you could definitely go with the 2 different patterns. But we're going to go with these 2 patterns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adhere this top part here down to this piece. So we're going to line this up on the card base, and I just want a little bit of this showing. So let's go right about here, and we're just going to add some glue just kind of to this top part right here. We'll add a little bit down the side, and we will close this down on top of it and just let that glue set. And now we're going to take these 2 pieces and we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to use the side with the white on it. We're going to use the same pattern, and we're going to line these 2 pieces up so that we get this fault line look. So we get this open area in between. So let's adhere these together. So I'm just going to add some glue to the bottom here and just a little bit up the side. And then we'll just layer these 2 pieces together. So you want that designer paper to be sticking out just a little bit from the top of the cardstock. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some pattern paper, just a different pattern behind these 2 torn edges. So I just have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of pattern paper. So it's actually the back side of this particular pattern. So we are going to add this, and how we're going to do that is we're just going to lay this inside our card, and then this piece is going to get adhered over the top. So we'll start with that first, And basically what we're gonna do is just add some glue. You don't wanna add your glue all the way to the edge, this torn edge. We just kinda want a little bit in the middle. Let's line up our paper and we'll push this down. And then we're gonna do the same with this bottom piece. So I'm just gonna add some glue. I'm gonna avoid that torn edge and just add a little bit of glue like this. And then this we're going to line up with the bottom of the card. Okay, so I have adhered this piece to the card. So it's gonna hold those torn pieces together to create the card front. So I'll have a really nice pattern on the inside of the card, and then I'll have this other pattern on the outside that is in between those two torn pieces. So now what you can do, since we didn't glue this all the way down, you can just take your finger and just kind of go along and flip this back. It just kind of creates a little bit more depth for the card. It also brings out that white torn edge, because remember we adhered that torn edge down to the card front. So now by kind of playing with that, it creates a fun little torn edge. And then you can do the same thing up here. You can kind of play with this, and you can use your finger, you can use a bone folder, just to kind of lift this up a little bit and give it a little bit of depth and dimension. So doesn't that create just a really cool look? But I love paper tearing, so I thought this was a really cool little idea. So what we're gonna do now is just add some stamped images. So I'm gonna use some early espresso ink first, and I'm going to add just a little greeting down on the bottom. We'll just stamp it right on the cardstock. And then I'm going to take some pecan pie ink, and we're gonna add some stamped images kind of around the outside. Now this looks great just the way it is, so you don't have to do this, but I just thought it would be cool to add some stamped images on there. So I'm just going to ink up this image with a little bit of pecan, and we are going to stamp this up towards the top. So basically you stamp using the same color ink as the cardstock. And so we'll just add another little bit down towards the bottom here. And then you can go ahead and add some little gems. I'm just using some of these little rustic metallic gems. You can use the textured dots as well. It looks just as beautiful. And we'll just add those, and that is really all there is to it to this card. All right, so the second way that you can use this technique is, instead of tearing designer paper, we're gonna tear some colored cardstock. So I'm gonna use some early espresso cardstock, and we're gonna tear it along with the card base, which is pecan pie. So you're going to start with the same card base, and then instead of using the pattern paper, I'm using cardstock this time. So this piece is 2 3/4 by 4 1/4, and we're just gonna line these two pieces up and do our paper tearing. So we're tearing both the card base and this little piece of early espresso cardstock. We're tearing them both at the same time. All right, so for the top, we have this little piece of early espresso cardstock, and by tearing them at the same time, you can see you get the same kind of look. You know, you don't have to tear the two pieces separately. It makes it a little quicker. So if you remember from the last card, I had to actually flip this upside down and use these this way. Now you could certainly do that. You can certainly flip them up and come up with that same design. Or you can just keep them the way they are. Because we're not using pattern paper, we can flip these pieces over and use the torn edge. So that gives it a really fun look. It gives it just a completely different look from the last card. So here's what the last card looks like. And if I want this look, then these pieces have to be flipped upside down so that I kind of get that diagonal look. But if I want to create this other look, I just flip these pieces over and use the side that has the torn paper. And that's the side we're going to use to create this particular card. So let's go ahead and adhere these pieces together. So I'm just gonna line this up. We'll add some glue and fold this down. And then while that's drying, we are gonna go ahead and adhere these two pieces together. So we'll layer those. All right, so it'll look like that. So it gives you a much wider fault line than the previous one. So let's go ahead and add this pattern paper. We're gonna use the same pattern paper that we used for the previous card. So this is just a 4 1/4 by 5 1/4 inch piece. And we'll start at the top and we'll add some glue. And remember, we won't go all the way to the edge with our glue. So we'll add that. And then we'll add this piece down on the bottom. So again, don't add it all the way to the edge, that torn edge. And we're just gonna add this piece off to the side. So once you are done with creating your fault line here, then you can go ahead and decorate it. And this is what the finished card looks like. So basically, I have that paper in the center. I added my stamped images and then a few embellishments. But notice how the fault lines look very different. And that's just the way I tore the paper the second time. All right, so that is the second way that you can use this fault line design in your card making. All right, and the third way that you can use this design is to do it with 2 pieces of pattern paper. And then for this one, it actually kind of creates a little fun fold card. So the top part of my card is free. You know, you can open this, open and close it, but this bottom part is adhered down to the card base. So let me show you how I made this one. So for this last design, it basically uses the same size card base. And so this time what we're going to do is we're actually going to just tear this by itself. So we're gonna start out that way. We're just gonna go up in the corner here and we're just going to tear down towards this other side. And we're gonna create these 2 separate pieces. So I'm actually going to use the torn edge for the bottom and this torn edge for the top. So that will be my, my design here. So for this particular card, I actually am going to use some larger pieces of designer paper. So these are 4 1/4 by 4 inches. And so we're going to tear these 2 pieces together and we're just going to line it up with this particular design that's on the top part of the card. And we are going to tear these together. So we're gonna find that line and we're just gonna slowly tear these and we're gonna keep these lined up and we're just gonna tear like along this same pattern here and we'll just go all the way to the edge. Okay. So that will create the 2 pieces that we need for the top. And then we're gonna take this remaining piece and we are going to use these on the bottom. So isn't that cool? It creates just a really nice little design that we can use for the bottom. All right, so let's adhere this piece first. So let's add a little bit of glue on this back part. So the process for adhering this is basically the same as what I've been showing you all along. The only difference is we're going to be adding 2 different pieces here. So now we're going to figure out where we want this one. So we'll go right about there and let's add some glue. All right, so we have those 2 pieces. And now we're going to do the same with these pieces for the bottom. So the first piece that I'm going to add is this piece. And I'm actually just gonna line up these 2 pieces together. We'll just adhere it just like that. So let's go ahead and add some glue here. And we will add this piece right on top. And then let's add this other piece. So we want these two pieces to just be showing just a little bit like this. And then we're going to adhere it to the card, and it's going to create this fun little opening. So let's add some glue, and we'll add this piece. Now, the closer you adhere these pieces together, the bigger the opening is obviously that you're going to have. So this piece is actually going to get adhered on the inside first, and then this piece will be kind of your fun fold section. But notice how they both overlap, so that's kind of fun. But before we adhere this piece, I'm going to add a piece of white cardstock on the inside. So I just cut a 4 1/4 by 4 inch piece, just enough so that it would go underneath, you know, this bottom section here. So I'm going to add this. So we'll add this to the inside, and we'll adhere it just a little bit from the top. And we're going to adhere this right down to the inside of the card, right over that, so it overlaps that white cardstock. All right, and then that is what the card looks like. And then you can go ahead and stamp, you know, a little image here, a little greeting. So for this one, I'm going to use this thank you, and we are going to stamp it right about here. And that is what our card looks like. And then you can go ahead and decorate it any way that you want. You can add those additional images. So I will show you the finished card. So this is what my other card looked like. So it just has that overlapping designer paper, and then still has space on the inside for you to write a little message, but your greeting kind of peeks through that torn paper. So I just thought this was a fun and just kind of a different way to use this fault line technique to create some really beautiful cards. Okay, so there you go. Now you have 3 different ways that you can use the fault line technique in your card making. And if you enjoyed these card ideas, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have a fun and creative day, my friends. Take care.